Oh, yeah. What's happening, y'all? Welcome back to another Ambient Masterclass tutorial. My name is Chris from Signs of Life. It is so good to see you all. I think we're having a record for the most watched stream ever, and we just started, so happy to see that. Happy to see all of your shining faces here. It has been a minute since we did an Ambient Masterclass, but the time felt right, and that is the power that this channel has. I can just, on a moment's notice, turn a switch, and we can get into a Masterclass tutorial. Now, before we start, I do want to give a couple special shout outs. Number one, I want to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters. Thank you all so much for all of your monthly support. It really means a lot to me. If you guys miss seeing me live, you're missing out because it's over on Patreon. Every single month, I put the best content that I possibly can onto the Patreon channel. We just did a track feedback session live stream where I proposed challenges to each person who submitted tracks. It was a really wonderful event, and every single month you get presets, you get extra tutorials, and you get live streams just like this. So go check it out. It's going on Patreon, so thank you all for your all support. I see a lot of you in here. Second of all, I want to give a special shout out to my friend Martin, whose birthday is today. It was a really special occasion. We all shared a moment there yesterday at Martin Sturzer's wonderful at-home concert. It was like really amazing to see all of you in there. And yeah, we all felt the energy. It was just like super huge, and I just, you know, like that kind of thing, that's the magic of this corner of YouTube. It's like we're all together, we're in this community. So thank you all so much. Happy birthday, Martin. Barang, thank you so much for the super chat. I truly appreciate you, man. And that being said, let's get right into this. We're here for a masterclass. Let's do this thing. I've got a masterclass prepared for you. Now, mind you, that the title of this video is 7 Big Mistakes That Beginner Producers Make, okay? So a lot of you are experienced in production. So this video is aimed towards someone who considers themselves a beginner, and maybe you don't, really identify with that label, but at the same time, we all can go back to the beginning and learn something. So even if you're not a total beginner, you definitely might be able to pick up on some tips that I have here for you today. So I just want to give one more note before we start. You can see it right there on the bottom that I'm going to highlight all of the points that I have here today. But if you want the full transcript of today's live stream, it's going to be on Patreon as soon as this live stream finishes. So I'm going to wrap it up, send it into a PDF, and put it on Patreon for y'all who are already there. So patreon.com/signsoflife. The link is in the description down below. And here we go. When we think about ambient, we all want to create that sound that creates an instant existential void between the two sides of your brain that lifts you up into hyperspace. Where soul meets sky, and you're immediately teleported into a faraway place. But when reality hits and you're only left to the empty buzz of a sawtooth wave when we open up a synth, things can get more challenging from there. So how do we take these tools, with no guidebook, mind you, and turn them into intricate and complex sounding ambient music pieces? If you're a beginner to the genre, that's okay. In the place of beginning, all possibilities are open to you, and you can go in any direction that you choose. Let me repeat that. In a place of beginning, all possibilities are open to you, and you can go in any direction that you choose. However, there are some things that you may want to watch out for along the way. Developing good habits as a producer is essential to making good quality music every single time. So, what I just said there was the place of beginning is a state of mind. And that means that all possibilities are open and you can go in any different direction. So even though this video is titled 7 Big Mistakes That Beginner Ambient Producers Make, I want to wrap you guys around the concept of being a beginner. Because in my modular synth video, I said that, I quoted Shirai Suzuki, and I said that in the beginner's mind, all possibilities are open. In the expert's mind, there are few, which is true. And I've adhered to that mantra every day since I read it. It's so true, because it's like you can think that you can get really far in something, but then really it comes back to that place of beginning. And then from there, you can open up the void and pull out new ideas. Because that's where new ideas come from, is that blank existential void that we're trying to fill up with sound. And that's what becomes the music that we make. So, how many times have you gone into a songwriting session with 5 different things that you're trying to think about? Think about this. When you are sitting in front of a blank DAW, how many times you sit down and you go, oh, I'm gonna do this. Oh, I need to do that. Oh, I need to turn out my pads. Chris said I need to do this. No. But the truth is, the less you have to think about before you start a song, the better. You want these concepts that I'm about to present to you to become second nature, so when you set out to make a piece, you're focusing less on what you're doing wrong, and instead focusing more on how to create a better final result, and how to bring out the most expressive, technically amazing sounding music without allowing the feeling of self-doubt creeping in that tends to hijack your trajectory, leaving you feel like your time spent was worthless and you don't know where to go from here. Let's back up for a second. That was a lot. It was a wrong sentence, but listen to me again. You want to be focusing less on what you're doing wrong and instead focusing more on how to create a better final result and how to bring out the most expressive, technically amazing sounding music without allowing the feeling of self-doubt to creep in that intends to hijack your trajectory, leaving you feel like the time spent was worthless and you don't know where to go from here. The important thing to remember is that you can and will get better with time, and with the right amount of helpful advice, there'll be nothing to stand in your way of achieving the musical goals that you've always dreamed of. So, that's what I want to sort of open this up with, is that when you start to have doubts inside of your mind, like, oh, this isn't quite right, this doesn't sound right, this mix shape isn't right, this pad is too loud, those kind of things, the more you practice them, they become second nature. So we haven't even gotten to any of the points yet. But just for a second, try to imagine a time when you can go into a session and you're not thinking about anything but allowing your creativity to flow naturally without being blocked by a technical thing in the DAW, by anything at all. You're just moving, you're just doing, right? That's where you want to be, and that's when the magic happens, is when you're not thinking and you're just doing. However, to get to that place, you do need to plan out your route. And without a guidebook, how are you going to get there? That's where I come in. So, the 7 big mistakes that beginner producers make. Let's start here. The pads are too loud. Now this one, I don't care who you are, we've all been guilty of this at one point or another. We either started like this, we went back to this, or we put too many of them and they just came in as too loud, all right? Because when you listen to really good music, now before I even get into this paragraph that I'm about to read, have you guys listened to the reference music that I have right there on the bottom? The Glass Shore, okay? This album is a prime example of controlled sequences, and pads. Period. Like, if there ever was a masterclass on how to do this correctly, that's the album right there. Okay? Listen to this album with that in mind. How loud are these pads? How do they support everything else that's going on? And at what point do I take the music that I'm making and bring that same aesthetic into exactly what I want to create? Because if you can do that, you'd be on Exosphere. All right, so pads are the hallmark of ambient music. They literally define the genre for most people, and even for the average listener, when they hear a pad, they think of ambient music. However, if you're using your pads in a way that overpowers everything else in your mix, you're doing your pads wrong. It's not necessarily volume either. Most pads live in a zone that I like to call the trouble zone. It's a zone of frequency that is either gonna make or break most tracks. That zone is between 800 and 3000 hertz, give or take. And it's the sector of the frequency spectrum that we most identify with because it's where our ears naturally hear the human voice. If this space is too crowded with any element of the mix, chances are those frequencies will stack on top of each other and start to cause resonance or resonance spikes, which we're gonna get into later, and therefore appear to sound louder than they actually are. So, this trouble zone, 800 to 3000, you can find it. You can look at it. You can visually see it. What's going on? I don't know what that was all about. But what it is this zone. And if you take a span, you put on your master fader, you're gonna see that zone. And if you play a pad in any range between C3 and C4, you're gonna see that zone. So here's the fix. The fix is not to overdo the removal of that area, but be aware of it. Even if other elements start to creep in, like sequences, like drum sounds, or any other element that you have in your track, let the pads accompany whatever else is playing in your song and support them, not the other way around. A great example of this is in the song The Optical System in the Glass Shore by Hinterland. In this track, the pads are merely a shadow of the overall sequence in the song that carries the rest of the song from start to finish. If you approach your pads in a way where they don't get in the way of anything else in your mix, you'll be well on your way to achieving a mix shape that sounds aesthetically pleasant, but still has the spaciousness that you're after. So, I want you guys to listen to The Optical System and think to yourself, how loud are those pads? Because they're not loud at all. They are merely a shadow being cast from the sequence. And sometimes a pad that's so quiet and you put reverb on it, that's all that you need. Now, this leads me to my next point, but I just want to make this really clear, is that if your pads are too loud, it's going to overpower everything. But the fix is not to remove that pad, but find a balance between the pad, between the reverb, because reverbs, again, stack, right? And allowing those pads to support those sequences. And maybe sometimes the pad is just the reverb itself. Which leads me to point number 2. The second mistake is using too much reverb. Oh boy, this is a pretty obvious one. I said this was a beginner video though. Reverb is one of the most widely used effects in ambient music, yet most beginners don't quite know how to use it properly, and that's okay. It's easy to overdo things to come back and find that it may be how you were using the reverb or the actual reverb that you're using that didn't allow you to achieve the sound that you're after. I don't think I need to repeat that, but that's a pretty important sentence. It's easy to overdo things only to come back and find that it may be how you're using the reverb or the actual reverb that you're using that didn't allow you to achieve the sound that you're after. A lot of the times as ambient musicians, we go reverb chasing. Oh, what are you using? What are you using? And we're all like looking at each other's reverbs, like which one you got? Which one you got? It's like we're trading them like cards or Fortnite or NFTs. We're like, oh, which reverb you got, man? But the key is to find a reverb that you feel comfortable with and then use it correctly. And yes, Supermassive is free. However, I see a lot of people using vintage Verb and they wonder what's up with Room because I'm using Room and they're like, dude, what's up with Room? I'm like, you have to hear it to believe it. Algorithms are different. Sean knows this. That's why he separated his products out into separate products. Supermassive was just an experiment that he's like, you know what? This would be cool if I just gave it to everybody. It's a delay and a reverb. It's not just a dedicated reverb. So when you start getting into like the scatter part of it and like, you know, all that like coloration that it does, Supermassive is a tool, but it's not the only tool. It's definitely not a pure reverb in a reverb sense. I use Supermassive on my chain. However, I don't use it in every single track. Because then the whole thing just sounds like Supermassive, right? All right. Now, where'd I leave off? Okay. If you're not using reverb as a send effect, start now. Point blank, that was for beginners. Use your reverb as a send effect. Send effects, add them to the end of your, add them in your DAW, just send, return, use it, okay? Using reverb as a send effect is the best way to get a big sound from your reverb, but still keep the original signal of your sound intact. That's a really important point that I think a lot of people miss, is that you get to keep all of your original signal with a send. Once I started using reverb on a send, my music became more clear and I was able to tastefully use reverb in a way that allowed all the elements of my music to blend together and shine in ways that are not as easy to do, and I put that in quotations, not as easy to do when using insert effects. And insert effects, if you don't know, are separate effects on every single track. The same goes with delays. Think about how badly multiple different delays with different speeds would sound like when played at the same time. Imagine that. Imagine if you had a track that had multiple different delays and the delays weren't even synced. How bad would that sound? If you think about reverb, what's reverb? Reverb is just multiplied delay. So if you're playing with different reverbs, you're coloring your tracks in different ways, and that stuff can truly add up real quickly. Even if it's not perceptible, you still are hearing subconsciously, the listener is getting all that reverb tank in different spots, right? So using one single reverb on one single track can be the best way. Now, this reverb can either be inside your DAW or it can be as like outside. You could use an outside reverb. Like if you use the Big Sky on your track, I wouldn't fault you for that because it's a beautiful reverb. If you use the Mercury 7 on your track, it's a beautiful reverb, right? If you use the Black Hole on your track, it's a beautiful reverb. However, it's how you're using it. So the other thing I want you to invite you to try is not just using the reverb on a send, but if you're gonna use it as an insert, I say this listen really close. If you're gonna use it as an insert, say with a harder reverb or something similar, like I said, my Big Sky or Mercury 7 or something like that, to try the old ambient guitar trick, which is to have a low mix level and a really long decay. Let me say that one more time. The trick is to have a low mix level and a really long decay. This is similar to the way send effects work, where the send effect reverb is at 100% wet and you're only adding signal to it by sending signal by percentage. So this is similar and it gives you a very long tail, but you're tastefully adding the signal by keeping the mix down. Okay? You're right, EQing the reverb is also important. This is similar and it still gives you a very long tail, all right? So it can be a really great way to incorporate different colors of reverb without having them clash with each other. It's also a great way to use reverb and still maintain the clarity that good quality ambient music requires. Y'all get it? So if I was playing my guitar through a Big Sky, which is one of the best known reverbs I would put the mix at 30 and the decay at 30. 30% wet, 30 seconds of decay time. You feel what I'm saying? So it's a super big tank, but a super low mix. Try that with a hardware synth. You'll get the same result. If I put my Hydra through a reverb, outboard reverb, or even Valhalla, put it at a super high decay, a low mix, watch what happens. You get a beautiful signal, and you still get all those beautiful artifacts because they're still being sent into that big old reverb tank. Y'all get it? All right. I had some great ideas in the chat. Supermassive plus room, that's my preferred combination inside the pyramid. Watching with the Church of Science of Life. EQing reverb is so important. Well, that's why I do this on Sundays, all right? And yeah, the reverb in the effects chain is not the best idea. Better to use it at the end or in buses. It's better to use it in buses. And when you use it in buses, I don't think did I add this to the PDF? No. A send effect should always be 100% wet. 100% wet as a send effect, okay? Therefore, when you send percentage of signal, you're doing the same thing in reverse, right? You're doing the same thing as if you had it as an insert and you were lowering the mix down. With the mix at 100% wet as a send effect, then you're just adding a little bit of mix, little bit of mix, little mix, and then you do it so subtly, all right? I use Valhalla Room on a send effect, 100% wet, 55 seconds of cadence. All right, so. How y'all liking this so far? Is this good? Are we cool? Can you guys hear me all right? I like seeing y'all in here in the chat. This is good. This is Ambient Masterclass format. And this is for sure a record how many people we've ever had watching the show. But hey, I'm Signs of Life. Listen, I'm coming to you from the energy of a full moon. All right, and we're gonna get into the whole point of this video towards the end. Now, number 3. We talk about this in the Science Circle a lot. Avoid resonant spikes. Now, resonant spikes, it's very important. It's very important to know what a resonant spike is, because if you know what it is, then you can avoid not doing it, right? So resonance is the unnatural buildup of frequency in a certain range. Now, I have a video about this on my Patreon, and it's a really good video because it clearly explains exactly what I'm talking about. Resonance comes off to our ears as feedback, and it's unpleasant sounding, even if it only lasts for a second. And like I said, resonance is the unnatural buildup of frequency at a certain range. The reason why this happens is when you have multiple elements in your mix, some of those frequencies might stack on top of each other, causing those buildups and forming what we call a spike that will need to be dealt with in the sound design or mixing stage. The quick fix is to use a span on your master fader to find these unnatural buildups and hit them with an EQ. That's the quick fix. That's not the fix. A more advanced fix is to locate those frequency buildups in the sound design stage before you even start making your track by not adding too much resonance to your filter. That's one of the obvious culprits, or not allowing sound or samples to build up at a specific range. Remember, too much frequency in any given area will cause these spikes, and you don't want to avoid cutting into your mix whenever possible. You do not want to cut into your mix. That is the last possible resort. That's a job for a mastering engineer, and at the creative stage, when you're still working in MIDI, that ain't you. Finding the root cause of those spikes is important, so when it comes time to mix, you can just focus on volume level and arrangement and not worry about any technical errors on your master chain. Now, to illustrate this, that's a new track I'm working on, Francisco. All right, so to illustrate this, I made a graphic for all you visual people out there, all right? So I made a graphic. Look at that, showing you what a bad mix shape would look like and then a good mix shape. It's a very simple graphic. However, look closely. The bad mix shape has nothing going on after a certain range. I think it looks like 2 or 3K is when it stops, okay? And then a good mix shape is balanced throughout. It has a nice healthy dip at 100, 200, beyond the sub bass. Those pads are under control. It's got a nice bump at 3K, and then those high frequencies are just toyed with. You see what I'm saying? These two tracks were both taken from submissions to My Sign Circle. Okay? This is the kind of thing we talk about every single month, twice a month on Patreon. We go over stuff like this to help you become a better producer. So, the bad mix shape, again, lack of high frequencies, lack of detail, lack of balance, and there's no real response down there, even at the sub-bass range. It's like, it's flat. And then there's all those like little spikes, and plus you can see that unnatural buildup of frequency at like the treble zone. Like I told you, the treble zone is that mid-range where those pads are. Because the pads in this zone right here, I can't highlight it, but the pads in this zone, in the middle zone, are louder than the bass itself. That is not true, Synkrotron, and I invite you to take a listen to anything on Cryo Chamber and put it under a span. If you buy an album on Cryo Chamber, they're gonna send you the MP3s. You take an MP3 and you put it in your DAW. You put a span on that, look at the frequency response. They will look exactly like the good mix shape. I guarantee it. You see what I'm saying? Because when I listen to those are extremely detailed, and Simon has a very high quality filter. He doesn't just take anything off the street. And I'll tell you this, he's got a lot more submissions than anyone else out there in the dark ambient genre. And I've had people who've gotten rejected by him multiple times because it just hasn't been up to his quality standard. And just because it's dark ambient does not mean that it's dark. Like dark, we think of lack of detail, lack of high frequency. That's almost like, yeah, put the Council of Nine stuff through a span. See what happens. You're gonna find that it looks almost exactly like Echo Seasons, almost exactly like Hinterlands, almost exactly like Transponders. Not in the same way because there's sequences and percussional stuff going on, but if you pick something very similar, it's gonna look similar. It's almost like you're examining the golden ratio. You know what I'm saying? Like you're looking at something because it has all the detail in there. It has the proper bass response. And so when you listen to it, you don't think about what genre is this, you don't think about the technical aspects of the music. You think about how does this music make me feel, the emotional response to it. But I'm glad you brought that up because dark ambient doesn't necessarily mean dark. The best dark ambient is like moody, but it also has clarity. That's the kind of dark ambient I really like, and I could pinpoint it in a second. When I open up a Cryo Chamber album, I'm like, oh damn, I like that. Because it's like long form and creepy, and it's got these evil sounds, but like you could hear everything. It's like panoramic. You know what I'm saying? That comes down to your ability to move frequency. PC, you're welcome. Thank you for being here. All right, let's move on to point number 4 because we're cruising right along. This is good though. I'm like I said, I'm coming to you the energy of a full moon, and it's time. It was just time to do this because we're gonna get to a big point at the end. All right. So number 4, not using smooth transitions. Now this one, oh my God, this is one of the hardest ones. It's one of the hardest ones because transitions are important in all genres of music. Think about that. They are. Even if you don't even listen for transitions, they're still there. They help guide us through a song from one section to the next in a way that allows us to consciously be prepared that a change is about to come. Making sure your transitions are smooth allows your listener to focus less on the details of your track and more about the overall emotional response, which is far more important. I just said that. One of the biggest blockades to having smooth transitions is actually making them. Spending time experimenting with different sound design techniques to find what works for your style of music, and more importantly, study other artists and how they do their transitions and try to recreate them. It's like you don't want to do it. You don't want to do the hard work to make the real work easier. And that's what sucks about transitions, is that they don't seem important, but they're super important. And when you're in the flow, when you're in the creative flow, and you want to just like have one section, one sequence ends, the other one starts, you want to just like whoop, and then move to the next thing. But then you have to stop for like a half an hour and create a transition between the two. So, what's the fix? There's so much more life beyond using just white noise and a boom transition. And I encourage you to spend time crafting your own transitions. Just how much time you would spend making pads or sequences or drums or any other part of your music. Having a library full of transitions can be a helpful way to speed up the process and make it a lot more enjoyable than having to solve a problem right in the middle of a creative session. You see what I'm saying? So think about the science of a transition. The transition is just on its most basic level. Then it can be right? It's like you could do that. You could do all kinds of things. Think about the speed of an LFO. You could ramp up the speed of an LFO onto a filter, or speed up even the actual speed of a sound with a ramp, and then record that and resample it and just continually building up these transitions, right? And even if it's just as simple as a sequence, it goes and then it fades out, right? You could do that in MIDI, you could do that with audio, you could do all kinds of stuff. You could spend an afternoon doing this. But just remember, transitions are the sort of glue and the binder between different sections. But the other thing that I mentioned in this paragraph was I want you to study other artists and see how they do it. Listen to the transitions in the Glass Shore, and they're not like whoosh bang transitions. They're not like crazy Ambient transitions. They're not even like dubstep they're not like that. But it's like the way they subtly weave these sequences in and out, it's so thoughtful. And here's a simple one, I talk about this in the Science Circle, is that you could like take a delay level, say you have a delay level at like 50%, and then on a sequence, and then delay level goes right towards the end of that sequence, it goes, and it just scales right to 100. And then you have a further, and it just cycles out, right? The delay goes from mix 50 to mix 100, turn the feedback up a little bit, and then you're delaying over and over and over again, and that becomes your transition. So you can use effects as delay elements, effects as transitional points to say, all right, that's my transition, using effects, all right? Bragg says, you can make synth presets with different transitions and then add as many macros as you can. Then one preset can have more than one sound, and it saves a lot of time. We got some real pros dropping masterclass level knowledge in the live stream chat. So if you're catching this on replay, make sure you catch the live chat as well. Let me repeat that. You can make synth presets with different transitions and then add as many macros as you can. Then one preset can have more than one sound, and it saves a lot of time. That's deep, y'all. Scott Lawler, what's up? Good to see you here. Venom Destroyer, welcome. All right, so that's number 4. It's just, you know how this goes. It's the tough work. It's the work that you don't want to do. It's the work that you feel like you don't want to spend time doing that because you'd rather be doing other things. But then when it comes down to it, and like I said, if you have to stop for half an hour in the middle of a session, it really kills your mojo. All right, so spend time making transitions. Spend time studying how transitions are made, and your creative work time will be that much more enjoyable. All right, number 5. Make your ideas concise. This is the big one. All right, this is a big one. Number 5, make your ideas concise. A lot of the time we get caught up in making music that doesn't feel like any specific genre because we put too many ideas in a track without considering what the overall effect of those ideas might be. The best way to keep your ideas concise is to keep it extremely simple when it comes to arrangement. One pad, one synth, one sequence, and then build from there. The other thing that helps with this is to find other artists in the exact genre that you want your music to be placed in and try to pinpoint exactly how many elements are happening in the music at any given time. Should I say that again? Find other artists in the exact genre that you want your music to be placed in and try to pinpoint exactly how many elements are happening in the music at any given time. This way you can figure out what the best way to approach your own track should sound like without having to add too many parts or remove them just because you're trying to push the song in an undesirable direction, all right? So you don't want to add too many things, because when you add too many things, then you might get all woo, it's like, it starts moving out of genre. Now, I am actually one who likes to add a lot of ideas. However, I like to keep my ideas concise. Like number 5, I like to stay in my lane, okay? If you're using a reference track, place the track directly in your DAW and solo the track. Place the track directly in your DAW, even if it's a master track from another artist, whatever. Solo the track. Listen to each of the elements and how they begin to stack. A great example of this minimalist approach is in the track Biome on the new album from Transponder, Star Maps Volume 1. Listen to Biome. All right, it's not the reference album that I have here today, but it's a brand new album from Transponder. Listen to the song Biome. In Biome, there are specific moments where you can clearly hear that there's only 1 or 2 pads underneath the sequence. It's moments like this which remind us that it's not always about the positive space that we add, it's the negative space as well. Let me say that again. It's not always about the positive space that we add, AKA the frequency, it's the negative space as well. Silence is the most powerful but hardest tool to use for any musician. Silence is the most powerful but hardest tool to use for any musician. If you can learn to use negative space in a positive way, you'll be well on your way to creating more spacious, more concise, and better music that has more meaning because you held the concept together. That was deep, y'all. When I wrote that, I was like, damn. When you can learn to use negative space in a positive way, you'll be well on your way to creating more spacious, more concise, and better music that has more meaning because you held the concept together. Listen to Star Maps. Listen to The Glass Shore. Understand that when you add anything to the frequency space, that's positive space. But when you have gaps, when you have fade outs, when you have tails, that's negative space. Learning to use silence, that's huge. This is so important, y'all. Silence is powerful, just like subtractions in your arrangements. I agree. This is true for any music. That's exactly why I'm streaming. Number 6, the full moon. No, it's time for a masterclass. So, number 6, let's talk about this. Using harmonic separation. Before we even get into this, let's talk about what harmonic separation is. Harmonic separation is the frequency separation between 2 sound sources. If you have a low pad on one end and you have a high piercing hi-hat on the other, those 2 things are clearly separated in the mix and their harmonics won't clash with one another. Okay? So if I have a low pad and a high hi-hat, they are harmonically separated. Okay? They won't clash into it. However, when you start adding too many elements in the same space, that's when you need to separate those elements to create wider mixes that sound more balanced and clear. So let me go back to the visual slide for those of you who just joined us. So in this bad mix shape over here, okay, you see that everything is cramped together, and the only thing that's living there is everything between 100 and 2000. And it looks like a big hump and a big mound. But then the good mix shape is clearly balanced. And I'm gonna call them out. Brang, that's your track on the bottom. It's clearly balanced. Like you have the nice bass, the lower, 100 to 200. It's got a beautiful mid-range that kind of slopes down, just like the pink noise curve. Then you got a nice healthy bump there at 3,000 and 4,000 and 5,000. Then you have those little tiny details coming in right at the end at like 8, 9, 10, 12K. You're toying with the high frequencies like you just sprinkled, right? Just, right? And that creates a wide perspective because you can hear the lower end, you can hear the higher end, and everything else in between is not fighting for position. They're all balanced equally. Right, exactly, Jim. It plays tricks on the ear. This is so delicate. It's so hard to fully understand these concepts because they are masterclass level. Like now we're getting into the stuff that's like, that's the stuff that really takes years of practice, is learning how to separate those frequencies, learning how to arrange things so they don't crowd each other, they're not running into each other, learning how to create a mix that sounds spacious and wide. Like you have 180 degrees to play with, so why not play with it all? Like why not pan things out left and right? You know what I'm saying? Like in the Glass Shore, you can hear like there's sequences over here and then pads over here, and then they're literally toying with it. No, Synkrotron, that's not you. I made the bad mix shape up, but no, it's not. Listen, but we've all been guilty of it at one point or another, right? Like creating a bad mix shape, you don't have any, you don't have any high frequency response. It's a lack of detail. It's a lack of clarity. The pads are too loud. The bass doesn't shine through. You don't have any grounding. It doesn't have anything to sit on. There's no foundation. Okay? That's why I'm glad that we brought up the point. What is dark ambient? What is light ambient? It's all the same. It's all the same. Okay? If I put in a really good high quality track from a completely different genre, it would look like the good mix shape. Okay? All right, so let's go back to this. So, harmonic separation. If your mix looks and sounds like a huge mound of sound in the middle of the frequency spectrum, that's exactly how it's gonna come across to the listener, where even the most obvious details won't be heard because there's too many other elements that are drowning out the sound of those frequencies. Allow each element space to live in a frequency space all its own. If elements are coming together, that's okay. Just make sure they aren't trying to overpower each other, either by adjusting their volume level or adjusting where they fall into the arrangement to allow maximum separation to create a track that spans across the entire frequency spectrum, all right? So you can either adjust their volume level or adjusting where they fall in the arrangement to allow maximum separation to create a track that spans across the entire frequency spectrum. Okay? So, separate your track out. A pad that lives here, a sequence that lives next door, a hi-hat that lives over here, a bass that lives way down there. You know what I'm like? Have it like everyone's got to show up. Every part of the whole thing has got to show up in order for it to sound balanced. All right. So listen to other tracks that you know are quite solid. Have good mix shapes. Listen to those and then try to get there with your own music. If you're not there yet, that's okay. You're gonna get there. If your mix doesn't sound exactly like Hinterland, that's okay. Just remember that like we all start somewhere. You have to filter out your sawtooths and add a reverb to get anywhere. And it takes time. This is not easy. It's taken me 10 years. And speaking of that, we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of my first record, Language of the Ancients. My 10-year anniversary of Ambient Online. My 10-year anniversary of the first Ascendant record. So these concepts weren't learned like in a day. They weren't learned overnight, but however, you can listen to the sound of my voice. You can listen to the things that I'm trying to convey to you, and you can use that to activate what's already inside of you. That producer that's waiting to come out. So this masterclass is not just information. It's not just a school class. I'm trying to wake you up. I'm waking you up. Open your mind to these concepts, and then the true producer that's waiting to come out inside of you will emerge. Like the phoenix will rise. That being said, point number 7. Give your music identity. Bet you didn't see that one coming, right? 7 big mistakes that beginner producers make. Number 7 is give your music identity. Having music that lacks an identity is an easy trap to fall into if you don't have a clear concept of who you are as an artist before you begin. Do I need to say that again? Having music that lacks an identity is an easy trap to fall into if you do not have a clear concept of who you are as an artist before you begin. There's only one unique you in the world. Why not make it even more special by bringing out the best possible artist identity? I see a lot of artists out there who are just trying to figure out who they are as artists. But then their music doesn't mean as much because they don't have a clear perspective. Spend time in the conceptual stage and write out narratives that define who you are and what your music is all about. Let me say that again. Spend time in the conceptual stage and write out narratives that define who you are and what your music is all about. Part of what makes the music of Ascendant so great. Ascendant is our own music, mine and Dawn, is we've continued to follow an overarching storyline since we first started making albums together. The same goes with Transponder, who also follows a theme. This is so important if you want to draw listeners into your world, and equally important when you're thinking about the actual sounds that you're adding to the music. Your sounds are the story. You're defining and redefining yourself with every single note that you play, every single little tweak of an oscillator or filter. Let your story and allow yourself to become that person. Everything that you are is going into this music, and that is becoming your identity. So allow this moment and allow this single time that we are in right now to be the catalyst to allow you to become what you always dreamed of. That's the whole point of this video. Give your music identity, and it starts with you. It starts with you. Thoughtfully crafting your artist identity and then having a clear representation of what that identity is all about is a huge part of becoming a successful artist. You don't have to adhere to this each and every time, but remember, you are the hero in your story. You are the main character. And when you put everything you have into your art, you want it to be the best it can possibly be. Discover who that character is and build upon it with every single track that you make. Invite your listeners in, even if you don't have listeners yet. Let me say that again. Invite your listeners in, even if you don't have listeners yet. Oftentimes, the best artists in history didn't have an audience, but they had a vision of who they were and what their art was about, and it had to come out. No matter what. If there was an immediacy of approval or not. In today's age, we get so caught up in the immediacy of approval that we forget why we create art in the first place. Why we create music in the first place. We do it because it has to come out. Use this feeling to propel you further than you could ever imagine and become better than you could ever dream before. My name is Chris from Signs of Life. If you want to learn more, you can join me on Patreon. Patreon.com/signsoflife. That's where you'll find me. I hope this masterclass was helpful for you. I hope it activated something inside of you that produced change in a way that you couldn't have gotten on your own. I want you guys to be better because I care. I'm someone who cares about people. I'm not here to talk about nonsense. I'm not here to like ruffle your feathers. I'm here to help you. This is my identity. This is my character. And that's what I'm bringing here today, under the energy of this full moon. I showed up. Are you? Will you show up? Will you show up for yourself? Ask yourself that today. Reflect on that. And if you're ready to show up, if you're ready to be that person, if you're ready to be that artist, it's gonna be a clear line between who you are now and who you want to become. There's no blockades left. That's it. It's a wrap. As I've said always, since the beginning of this channel, I've always said that if any of you want to be on Symphera Exosphere, you have the potential. You have the potential to be whoever you want to be. And that's why this channel is here. So thank you guys so much. Whether you're on my Patreon or not, whether you're just a subscriber to Signs of Life, thank you for being here. You are the ones who are propelling me to fulfill my role, and I'm the one who's giving you the gift to figuring out who you are and your identity and allowing you to be you through the music that you make. That's what it's all about. I wish you all the best. If you want the full notes from today's show, they're on Patreon. And thank y'all. It's been my pleasure. So as always, keep your heads in the clouds, but your feet planted firmly on the ground. My name is Chris from Signs of Life. Take good care, y'all. I'll see you guys in the next one.